Chris Martin for CG Tuts, and welcome to a very exciting tutorial. And today we are going to be creating the apple animation. Let me just play it for you here so you can see what we've got. The bullet rips through the apple, and it's all rendered out at 180 frames per second, so you've got the slow motion effect going on. The apple falls into the real wave and makes a splash. So very cool tutorial. We're going to be using Cinema4D, we're going to be using Realflow, and we'll be doing some post work in After Effects. So got a lot of stuff going on here, and we're basically going to break this tutorial up into 3 parts. So part 1 is going to be the where we start out in Cinema4D. We're going to export the scene from Cinema4D into Realflow. We'll do all of our setup work in Realflow, setting up the fluid apple and the assets that will be going through the apple, and then we'll export that data out of Realflow back into Cinema4D, and that'll be the end of the first part. Then we'll go into part 2, where we'll import the data back in from Realflow, set up the scene in Cinema4D, set up all of our lights and cameras, and we'll set it up for multipass rendering. And then in part 3, we're going to import the multipass into After Effects, isolate all of the objects in the scene, we'll apply all of our post effects, and then we'll render it out. So we've got quite a bit to do, so let's get started. Okay, so I've got my scene set up here, and I've got my apple, and there's not a whole lot to this. We've got our apple. We're just going to go into plugins, next limit, SD export. We're going to save all, which is just the apple. We'll give it an output file and navigate there. Give it a name. Save it and save SD file. Now let's go to Realflow. Create a new project, give it a path, click OK, create new project. Now we want to import our SD file, so we'll go to Import, Apple 2, and there we go. We have our, oh, sorry about that. We've got our apple in the scene. Okay, now you'll notice down here it says apple contains 1D generated faces that will be ignored. I downloaded this from the internet off of TurboSquid, so it's a free mesh model, but this is really not going to be a problem for the purposes of this tutorial. Now, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to set up 700 frames, and then we want to come over here to the Simulate tab, click on the down arrow, click on Options, and you want to set this to 180. This is 180 frames per second, and your max substeps will be at default at 333. You're going to take that down to 55. You're probably going to have 30 right here for your frames per second. And here's something that you'll probably want to know. If we've got it at 333 and we click OK, then you're going to have this error message down here saying that your choice of max substeps is too large. So you need to take this down to 55 in order to get rid of that. And this is basically talking about this max substeps. It's talking about the maximum number of steps calculated in a frame, and it just basically has to do with the overall accuracy and speed of the simulation. But if you take this to 180, this to 55, you should be in good shape. So let's go ahead and drop in some of the things that we're going to need to make this thing work. We're going to need a volume. We're going to need a gravity. We're going to need a fill object. And we're going to need a rocket. That's what we're actually going to have that's going to blow through our apple here. So let's go ahead and select the rocket, and we are going to the dynamics to rigid body. We'll go into the rigid body tab, convex hull is fine. We want to scale it up to 100. Let's see. 100 and 100. And then I want to give it a Z rotation of 90. Alright, so let's go ahead and move that guy up here and over. Let's just move him back. The other thing we want to do is set his dynamic motion to no, because we're not going to be making the rocket move based on velocity. We're going to actually keyframe the movement of the rocket through the apple. So I'm going to go ahead and go over here to frame 100, and for the position of X, we want to right click and add a key, and then let's go to 250, and we'll pull this straight through, and then we'll right click and we'll add a key. So now it starts out, and then at 100 it starts moving through. Okay, great. Now the apple, it's not going to have anything applied to it. There's no dynamics applied to the apple, because basically the apple is just going to act as a placeholder for the fill object. So let's go ahead and drop our real wave in here, just a little icon here, and let's go to the scale properties, and I want to scale from 20 to 1 to 20. Okay, so we've got our real wave in there, looking good. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave the real wave at the defaults across the board, so we're not going to make any changes to that. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to keyframe my gravity. So let's go over here to 350 and go to my gravity, and I want to set that to 0, and then I'll right click and I'll add a key, and then let's go one frame up to, we can go 2, doesn't really matter, and we'll take this back to 9.8, which is normal gravity. We'll right click and we'll add a key there. So from 0 to 350 there will be no gravity in the scene whatsoever, which is going to be what makes allows the fluid, the particles, just to sort of stay here in space. And then at 352 gravity is going to come into play, and it's going to make the particles fall down. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the volume, and let's fit it to the scene. Let's take a look what we've got here, and let's go into a couple different views here, because we want to make sure that our volume is right below our real wave, right here, because what's going to happen is when this apple, or the particles that are inside the apple, fall, it's going to hit the real wave, but we need them to be destroyed when they go below the real wave. Otherwise they'll just fall down here, and real wave will have to continue calculating, and eventually it'll shut your computer down. So let's go ahead and make sure that our volume is directly below the real wave. Okay, that looks good. So now let's take a look at our fill object. The only thing that we're going to change here, we're going to leave everything at the default. We're going to change the max particles to 90,000. Then we're going to come over here to the object and select the apple and click the fill volume to yes. And now we have our particles that are filling the volume here in the apple mesh. So now what we want to do is we want to come over here to the apple, and we want to turn it off basically. So we'll go to the simulation tab, and we'll say inactive. And that way it's going to turn this mesh off. So when these particles begin to fall, when gravity takes over at 350, whatever we set that at, I think 352, something like that, these particles will be able to fall. If we didn't turn this Apple mesh off, then they would be contained within this mesh. So basically what we have going on here is from 0 to 100 nothing's happening. Then at 100 our rocket is coming through. It's going to hit the mesh, and all this time we have no gravity going on. It's going to pull some of these particles along with it when this rocket runs through here, and then around 352 our gravity is going to come into effect, and the particles are going to begin to fall into the real wave. Now, one last thing that I want to do is I want to put a speed kill in here, and I want to set it to limit and keep, set that to yes, and the max speed to 1. And I'm going to lock my timeline, and I am going to go ahead, put this back to 0, and might as well turn this back on. I don't think it really matters, but we'll click simulate. And what that's going to do is it's going to sort of settle these particles down inside the fill object. So I'm going to go ahead and let that simulate, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, something I realized during that break that we need to go ahead and change. We've got the fill object set at the resolution at 1 here, and you can see we have 26,000 particles. That's not going to be enough. So select that, change that to 3. And this is going to recalculate, and after it does that, we're going to click reset, because we want these particles to go way up. 26,000 is just not enough. It's not dense enough. So after we reset, our particles, they go to 80,000, and that's what we're looking at. We need more particles to make this thing look right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to simulate again with the 80,000 particles, and I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so we're back. We're going to go ahead and simulate this out now, and we want to unlock our timeline. We want to take the speed kill and set that to inactive, and we want to take the Apple mesh and set that to inactive. And I think that we are ready to go. So let's go ahead and get this thing to start simulating, and I'm going to do that, and it's going to start, and I am going to pause the video while this is simulating out because it's going to take a while, and I'll be back shortly. Okay, so we're back. It is finished simulating, and I'll just run through the timeline here, and you can see the rocket actually goes through, hits the particles, and sort of leaves particles in its path. And then the gravity kicks in, and the particles fall into the real wave here, and you can see that it's actually deforming the mesh here. Alright, cool. So what we need to do now is go ahead and set up a meshing process here. So let's go over here and we'll add a new mesh to the scene, and we'll right click the mesh, insert fluids. We will select the fill object, click OK. Now for the polygon size, we'll choose 0.03. Go under filters, select yes. Relaxation and tension should be 0.1. For the fill object, we'll go to the blend factor, we'll type in 110. And for the radius, 0.02. So let's go in here to where we've got some particles being ripped apart here. And let's see what we've got. We'll right click on the mesh and click build. It's going to do its thing here. And there you go. Let's take that, go to the element, smooth shade, and you can kind of see a little bit better what we've got here. It's looks pretty good. That's exactly what we're looking for there. Okay, so let's now that we know that that's going to work for us as far as the mesh is concerned, let's go back to frame 0, go to export, export all, come up here and click this button to build our meshes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I will be back whenever that's done. Okay, so we're back, and our meshes, our meshing process is done, and we'll just scoot through the timeline here, and you can see we've got our mesh has been completed for all of the frames, and it's looking pretty good. You can see where it's going in there. Alright, so it's time to pull this stuff back into Cinema4D. But that's going to wrap up the first part of this tutorial, this 3-part series. So again, my name is Chris Martin for CG Tuts, and I'll see you in part 2.